Hi, I'm Jim Baccarosa, and welcome to Aviation Tech Talks. In this podcast series, we'll be speaking with industry experts and pioneers, delving deep into the latest developments and advancements in aviation tech. From futuristic aircraft designs to cutting-edge digital solutions, we'll be exploring how technology is shaping the future of the industry. So buckle up and join us for an exciting ride as we take off into the fascinating world of aviation tech. Welcome to Aviation Tech Talks, where innovation takes flight. I'm your host, Jim Baccarosa, and today we are going to be talking about urban air mobility, and more specifically, electric vertical takeoff and landing systems. Our guest on this episode is an aerospace engineering expert and an eVTOL aficionado, Mr. Roy Resto. Roy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jim.
Now, Roy, I've known you for almost a decade now, and I think I'm always impressed with your background. You have an incredible background. I'd love to share that with our audience today. So just for everybody watching, Roy is an experienced aviation industry professional who has served in management positions with several firms. He's currently the principal of AIM Consulting Solutions. Prior to that, he was the vice president of technical operations for Messier Bugatti Tracer, which is a family of the Safran Aviation Group. Prior to that, he was the COO of Quality Management Solutions, which is a consulting firm specializing in aircraft maintenance. In addition, Roy worked with American Airlines in their maintenance and engineering center, where he retired as a level 5 manager. And before that, he was with McDonnell Douglas. He's also a member of the U.S. Air Force Reserves, having served 32 years in electronic warfare and avionics. Roy served on the FAA's Suspected Unapproved Parts Steering Committee and the Aviation Suppliers Association Board of Directors. Roy's got an MBA in finance from Oklahoma City University. He's got a BS from Oklahoma State University and AAS in avionics from the Community College of the Air Force. He's also an aviation high school graduate. So completing this, he's got an FAA A&P license. He's an FCC radio telephone license with a radar endorsements. He's an FAA DAR, which is a designated airworthiness representative. He's instrument rated pilot. He also speaks fluent Spanish. Roy, did I leave out anything there?
No, my mother would have approved that, Jim.
It's an impressive background, I tell you. Every time we meet and talk, you always have some new background. One couple of things there I think we left off on your bio is that you also write a blog called the Cavu Cafe. Is that correct? Can you tell everybody a little bit about?
Absolutely. Yeah, Cavu Cafe is hosted by the Aviation Suppliers Association. And if you scroll down on their main page, down to the bottom of their main page, you'll see the link to my blog. Cavu, being CAVU, stands for Ceiling and Visibility Unlimited, which for those that may be involved in flying, whenever a pilot's talking to another pilot and say, hey, what's the weather like today? And they say, it's Cavu. That means, woo, it's beautiful outside, not a cloud in the sky, ceiling and visibility unlimited. So that's the name of my blog, Aviation Suppliers Association, down at the bottom.
Awesome. And a lot of regulatory discussions there, quality. I follow it. I think it's a great resource. Now, there is one rumor I have heard, and that is that you are also a Green Bay Packers fan. Is that?
Well, I'm up in the Cheesehead State, and Jim, as you're aware, being in close proximity, when you live there, man, you just get sucked into it, man. Whether you like sports or not. I'm not a big sports guy, but that's true.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, nobody's perfect, Roy. So, okay. So, well, we haven't even gotten started talking about eVTOL and kind of the impacts it's going to have on urban air mobility. I'd love to get your take to start this conversation out about what you think is the marketplace and just give us the big picture and maybe cover a few of these new acronyms for our viewers today too that we've already thrown out there.
Perfect. Yeah, aviation industry's never been at a loss for acronyms. And with the advent of all this new technology, boy, there's a slew of them. And I'm just going to cover a few of them. But before I do that, Jim, I've got to say that in my aviation career, I don't ever recall where the air has been so charged with a palpable excitement and expectancy regarding all this new stuff, which has yet come to fruition for sure. So, for example, Aviation, Gregory Davis, their CEO, he was recently quoted as saying, "We are expanding human possibilities by changing air travel. Electric flight is a step change that will transform society." Now, that's not me saying that. That's him saying it. That may sound like a lot of market speak, but just about everybody else is saying the same thing. This is going to transform air transportation as we know it today. Literally, and pardon the pun, uh, there is electricity in the air over this stuff. How you like that, Jim? I was practicing that all morning.
Well, I can't wait. Living in an urban center and dealing with traffic all the time, I'm ready for the Jetsons, I guess.
I There you go. There you go.
Yeah, Roy, maybe you could start with explaining a little bit more about eVTOL, what it stands for, and even define this acronym for our folks.
Okay. So this whole marketplace is defined by the small letter E. That's E as in electric, and then the capital letters VTOL, which is the focus of our session here today, meaning vertical takeoff and landing. For those of us in the industry a long time, the classic and traditional VTOL aircraft is associated with helicopters. But now you bring on this new technology and you add the small e in front of it, and there you have it, the eVTOL. Other acronyms that are coming on the scene include AAM for Advanced Air Mobility, UAM for Urban Air Mobility, UAS for Uncrewed Aircraft Systems, and then small e, capital CTOL, which stands for electric conventional takeoff and landing. So traditionally, airplanes that go to a runway and take off after a long takeoff roll, those are conventional takeoff and landing aircraft. But you add the small e because of all this electric technology that's come out, and so you have the ECTOL. But we're focusing in on the eVTOL, and then of course the whole marketplace uh, uh, in the background is this whole issue of drones. Now, let me just say a word about drones because we need to make that distinction here. Um, for those of us that are in the industry, for example, I am a pilot, as Jim said. I'm also instrument rated, but I'm certainly not going to show you the details, but that is my UAS pilot's license. UAS standing for Uncrewed Aircraft Systems. Now, for those of us in the industry, um, if you are if you're a professional pilot, like say of these aircraft, we do not call them drones. Don't call them drones. The Air Force doesn't call them drones. I don't call them drones. The FAA doesn't call them drones. The only time that it's appropriate to call a device, a drone, is in the sense of the consumer market. You know, you bought one for your kids, or you just want to take pictures around your house, or you just want to have fun. You're a hobbyist, whatever. In that sense, if you want to call it a drone, I'm okay with that. But the minute you cross the line into commercial operations, use the correct term. For example, UAS for uncrewed aircraft systems. So we're seeing a lot of investment out there on all of this going on. The military is investing in this technology and the manufacturers. Airlines are investing. Private funding is coming out of the woodwork. The OEMs, traditional OEMs in aviation, are acquiring some of these manufacturers. Even car manufacturers, such as Toyota and Hyundai, for example, they're getting into the mix. So we're seeing a lot of activity out there. And what I wanted to mention to you is that concurrent concurrent with all of this, with eVTOLs, you have developments of what's called hybrid power plants, switching over to hydrogen and fuel cells. This is all going on at the same time, concurrently with eVTOLs, with drones, with UASs. I've never seen the field so crowded. We are on the brink of a lot of things happening. So uh, let me just show you this first graphic and about the eVTOL um, marketplace. And the first graph where it shows the eVTOL market. And look at this. If you'll see from 2023, which is this current year, up to 2030, the marketplace just for eVTOLs, never mind drones, never mind all those other things I mentioned, just for that is going to be over $23 billion. It's my opinion, Jim, that this is definitely underrated. It's going to be much higher than that.
So, Roy, on this graph here, obviously it shows huge growth potential globally, with a majority of that coming in the North American markets. What do you think is driving this? What's the biggest factor that these folks are predicting this growth at?
So it's the vision that all the CEOs and all the manufacturers have for bringing this stuff to the marketplace, whether you're talking about air taxis, whether you're talking about uh, connecting, bringing passengers from rural areas right to the feeding the airlines, whether you're talking about cargo, whether you're talking about inspections, whether you're talking about forestry, firefighting assistance. Uh, any number, we have yet to see the end of where all of this technology can be useful to society, and I think that's creating a lot of the excitement in this thing.
Great.
but
Yep.
but look at this. If you're an investor, um, it says right there, between 2023 and 2030, what does it say there? The CAGR, or the compounded annual growth rate, 52% between 23 and 30. If I got the money to invest, sign me up, okay?
That's right. It's incredible growth that's predicted for this market, and we talk a lot of things about societal changes, and there are very few times in the last few hundred years, from industrial revolution to the invention of the wheel to air conditioning to computers to the internet and the informational stage, age that we're in, that this could be, in your opinion, that next step change in society. Do you think it's bigger than AI?
Well, funny you mentioned AI, because AI is certainly going to play into all this, Jim. But let's hold that for a little bit later, because I am certainly going to harp on that.
Will
But
do. Will do.
still talking about the marketplace. Let's go to the second graphic. Now, this is just drones. Now, notice that the graphic says global commercial drone market. Okay, as opposed to amateur, or you're just using this as for your kids. The minute you start saying, I want to use a drone and I want to get paid for my services, you have crossed the line into the commercial drone market. And typically, um, you're going to see drones being used for mapping and surveying, precision agriculture, filming and photography, which apparently happens to be the biggest use of drones right now,
Yeah.
inspection and maintenance, surveillance and monitoring. There's a whole lot more than this firefighting I'm seeing it used in. But look at the market there. By 2030, just for drones, it's twice as much as it is for the eVTOL at 47.38 billion forecasted. As I said, I still think that forecast that we shared with you on slide one is underrated. I think it's going to be 50% more than that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Just paying attention to the amount of money and the investment going into this space is astronomical, right?
I agree.
Yeah. So, one question though that I always get asked, Roy, is being in the industry, being in aviation. My friends all hear about eVTOL and they say, Jim, we already have helicopters, right? We mentioned that. We talk about vertical takeoff and landing systems. We already have helicopters, they ask me. Why are we so excited about this? And what's the big deal? Right? So how would you respond to that?
That's a good question, Jim. I appreciate that. And that's a logical question. First of all, it's not surprising that a lot of folks that raise that question for the rest of the industry happen to be represent folks that are in the helicopter industry themselves. So they see this as a huge competitor, probably taking them out of business or competing with them at the highest level. But we're going to see those helicopter operators switch over to eVTOLs very quickly. I assure you that, despite those voiced concerns. Now, here's the thing about eVTOLs versus traditional helicopters. Now, when I say a traditional helicopter, I am talking about traditional helicopter with two jet engines. Might be used for taking people from the coast out to all those oil platforms, certainly for evacuation of accident scenes, any number of them. That's a traditional helicopter. Well, for one thing, anybody that operates a helicopter knows the operating costs per hour for a helicopter are really, 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 really high. And so eVTOLs is definitely going to be significantly, significantly less operating costs. That's one. Um, and Jim, your one of your businesses is ProvenAir, with a specialty in managing and helping people out to manage their life limited parts. Well, a lot of people don't know this, but on a pound per pound basis, there is no other aircraft type on the face of the planet other than helicopters that has more life limited parts on it than a helicopter. So you have all the life limited parts on the for example, if it was two turbines, two jet engines, and then all that rotating, vibrating stuff that could potentially erode the metallurgical properties. They also have a long list of life limited parts. But guess what? eVTOLs, if they have any, it'll be a fraction of all those life limited parts that have to be carefully managed on helicopters. Of course, eVTOLs, there's no carbon emissions because they're all electric. There's less noise. For anybody that's been around helicopters, in the military or commercial, whatever, you can hear those puppies coming from miles and miles away, the thump, 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 thump. And on the other hand, I have to admit, when it comes to operationally, it can be argued that the two are very similar. So if you want to use an eVTOL to go pick up um, victims from a crash scene as opposed to a helicopter, operationally, it's going to be very similar.
Great. Well, Roy, we talked a lot about some of these different technologies. Could you go a little more in depth on some of the manufacturers or the OEMs that are building or trying to build some of these systems, and maybe talk a little bit about a few of their flagship models that we can see coming out in the next few years?
Thanks, Jim. I'm going to tell you, the playing field is mind numbing right now, Jim. When you include the brand new drones that are coming out, the eVTOLs, the eCTOLs, there's hundreds, literally hundreds, easily over 200 brand new manufacturers of names we've probably never heard before participating in this whole landscape over here every day. Now, I fancy myself a person that likes to keep up with the aviation news. I get it from several sources. Every day there are press releases of somebody doing something new. I know you've noticed it yourself. Now, because of that, I've chosen to focus on a few names that are interesting for the reasons I'm about to share with you. Here in the United States, I would definitely, everyone's following this company called Joby. That's Joby. Everyone's following that very closely. The aircraft that they're in the process of fielding is called an S4, and it's a pilot plus four passengers. It's very likely that Joby will be the first one in the U.S. to start literal operations. Don't confuse these trial runs and everybody's trying this and that. That's not actual operations. I'm talking about the first paying passenger where you're going to start operations in the United States will probably be a Joby product that's here in the United States. Also in the United
And Roy,
States,
what would
go
you
ahead.
attribute their lead to? Is it technology? Is it investment? What would you say there?
Okay, so a lot these companies that I'm mentioning to you right now, um, the technology that they're bringing to pass and the method by which they operate, and whether it's swiveling propellers or just up propellers that go up and down with a pusher propeller, it's all over the map. That would take another half an hour to explain. So there are significant variations in their design and how they achieve flight for sure. Um, so there's variations to that, but I'm just going to press on over here. But I agree with one of the options you gave. If these folks are the ones I'm mentioning it right now, is because early on they got those investors on board to fund their research and development, the certification efforts, getting people on board, consultants, employees, all the normal things that you associate with startups. So definitely the folks that were successful in getting that money, the investors, they're the ones we're talking about right now.
Got it. Got it.
Okay, following Joby is Archer. Their model that they're trying to bring to market is called Midnight. It's a pilot plus four passengers. The reason why I'm watching these guys is because the U.S. Air Force has expressed an interest in buying some of their products. And typically, when the government starts investing, that's another source of investment. And they're able to develop their products in interesting ways for the government that trickles down into the civilian side. Then going on beyond the U.S., there's a company called Volocopter. Volocopter. Their model they're trying to bring to market is called Velocity. It's a pilot plus one passenger. In Europe, along with Lilium, which I'm about to mention, so that's Volocopter and Lilium, is being watched very, very closely in Europe as likely to be the first to be certificated and to start operations. So, in the same way I said Joby in the US, over in Europe, be looking for any press releases from Volocopter and Lilium.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Great.
The moving on to Lilium, their product they're trying to bring to market is Lilium Jet, a pilot plus 4 to 6 passengers. Uh, then down in South America, we have Eve. Eve, that's EVE, Air Mobility. Eve Their aircraft they're trying to bring to market is a pilot plus 4 passengers. The reason why I'm watching this one is because they have an affiliation with Embraer, which we fly so much for a regional aircraft. Over in China, watch this one, is EHang. That's EHANG, EHang. So their market they're trying to bring is EH216-S. This aircraft they're trying to get certificated is going to be autonomous, no pilot. Okay, so this is interesting, and I'm going to break into that a little bit more here in the next few minutes. But keep your eye on that company EHang. They're already delivering their product to people that want to operate it. They're anticipating the CAAC, which I'll mention here shortly, being the Chinese aviation civil aviation authorities of China. They're about to get certificated, and if so, they may come out of left field and surprise a lot of people with being the first ones in operation. Airbus is their product is called City Bus, and a pilot plus 3 passengers. And finally, the last one I wanted to mention is Whisk Aero. That's WISK, and um, their aircraft is Generation 6, also autonomous. Keep in mind what I just mentioned there. 4 passengers, and they're a Boeing subsidiary.
Great, awesome. And you mentioned EHang, and I recently read an article on them that they are employing the what we call the three fundamental technologies in that one being full redundancy, another being autonomous flying, which you mentioned, and then the other is cluster management. Could you describe a little bit about what does that mean by full redundancy and cluster management? I think everybody understands autonomous flying, but the other two maybe could shed some light on that as well.
Sure. So when you see multiple propellers, for example, tied to an electric motor, you see those multiple propellers, you've got to have redundancy there. You've got to always assume that when you're flying, you may hit a bird. You got to always assume that there may be some FOD, foreign object damage. Something is going to damage those propellers one way or another. There may be structural failure, and if so, are the other propellers, the other remaining propellers, able to keep the aircraft flying in a safe configuration
Got it.
given the worst scenario. So first of all, you have the cluster of all those propellers, which causes the redundancy that we're looking for in aviation, right? In aviation, if one engine fails, that other engine by design will get you down safely on the ground. If one tire blows out on landing, well, you got a bunch of other tires. Most passengers are not going to even realize that. Redundancy is a keystone of safe aircraft design. The cluster management becomes the software by which, oh, I just lost a propeller number 3. Well, that creates this situation we called asymmetric thrust. Asymmetric, right? It's not symmetrical, it's asymmetric. So how do you manage that? You can't wait for the pilot to spend 5 minutes figuring out what went wrong, right? So you need software to intervene immediately and compensate for the asymmetric thrust being experienced.
Got it. Got it. So, with these redundant systems and cluster management and autonomous flying, I see there's a lot of challenges that are going to be placed because this is all brand new, especially on the regulatory bodies. And you mentioned the CAAC over in China, but and given that your expertise in talking about regulations, especially with the FAA, what do you think the challengers are going to be, not only for the manufacturers, which you talked about the technology, but for the regulators and how they are going to certify this aircraft either autonomously or even with pilots?
Okay, excellent question. So right now, the four major certifying bodies involved in this whole workspace are the FAA here in the U.S. Over in Europe is EASA, that's EASA. In Brazil is ANAC, or as the Portuguese would say, ANAC, and then the CAAC, the Civil Aviation Authority of China, over in China. Those are the four major players. Most people around the world are looking to see what the FAA does and what EASA, which is the European Aviation Safety Agency, by the way, over in Europe, they're looking to see what they do, and then everybody else would say, oh, this is successful, that's not successful, I'm going to use this, I'm not going to use that, in other regulatory bodies around the world. That's typically how it's been working, with the FAA and EASA providing leadership. I would closely look to see what the CAAC does. The CAAC is rising in terms of their influence in the aviation industry, and they have my respect, certainly. I will say that certifications can be categorized into the following topics. So there's certification of the manufacturer's models, certification of the operator's operations, right? So that's the manufacturer's got to get certified. The operator's got to get certified. Certification of the fixed takeoff and landing locations, such as vertiports. Certification of pilots and technicians. How does that all look? So I will say I have the greatest respect for the FAA and EASA, who has been providing up to now the greatest amount of leadership and all this stuff. Jim, all of this is brand new, brand new. That you can't use old models, so you got to introduce new models that fits the technology and the type of operations we're going through. And so the FAA and EASA, amongst the others I mentioned, they are critically uh, looking at what's happening here. Their number one uh, concern is safety, 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 over and over again. So uh, if you hear a lot of criticisms of the regulators that they're taking too long, or they changed their mind about this, or they were certifying this and now they're going to that, cut them some slack. I have nothing but the greatest of respect for the FAA and EASA. This is brand new. They're trying their best to make sure a safe product is brought to bear.
Yeah, and I think it's an incredible challenge for regulators to, get a handle on the emerging technologies that are happening at such speeds we're not used to, especially in aviation, right? I think there's other challenges. I'd love to get your comments on. You mentioned pilots. We already have a predicted pilot shortage with commercial aircraft,
Ah,
right?
good one.
But right, so how are we going to get these new pilots? Where are they going to come from? Okay, how are we going to certify them? And then beyond that, how are we going to support this entirely new mode of transportation? We talk about supply chain issues in commercial aviation right now. We're talking about a brand new mode of transportation. So, can you comment on a few of those challenges and what you could see happening there?
Okay, so let me just jump to making this observation. The question being, is the picture as rosy as the press releases would have us believe?
That's
And
right.
Jim, that's a wonderful introduction.
Never
You just
is,
gave
right?
us that. It never is, right?
Right, right.
The CEOs, it's always in their best interest to make us sound like they're the best company to invest in. I get it. Okay, so Jim, it's just like you mentioned. Where will the pilots come from when it comes to criticism? When people say, wait a minute, it's not as rosy as you're making it look." That's one of the first things to say. Where are the pilots going to come from? Now, remember earlier, I mentioned two companies and the A word, autonomous. Okay. So there's a bunch of folks, and I agree with them, that as long as you have to pay a pilot to fly 4 or 5 passengers around, I don't see how they're going to be a wildly profitable organization. They're going to have to price it accordingly, and the price may be too high for normal Joes and Janes out there. Uh, so where will the pilots come from? So that's where the autonomous aspect comes from. If I'm an investor and if I'm starting operations, this is just Roy talking, okay? I'm going right to the autonomous ones. I mentioned a couple of the companies earlier. They are using autonomous operations. In other words, when I say autonomous, the big thing you have to associate with that is pilotless, pilotless, right? So is there a big deal with that? I don't think so. The technology has been there for years. Okay. Uh, when I was growing up, when I was just a little boy, I remember getting on some elevators, right? And there was elevator operators. Now you don't see that. We don't think twice about it, right? Trains, for crying out loud. We all get on a bunch of trains right now. All those trains at the airport that takes you from one terminal to another. I mean, 40 years ago, there would have been an operator on every single one of them. Now we don't think twice about getting on them. It's all autonomous or robotic, whatever you want, by whatever means you want to call that. So, uh, tying closely in with autonomous, okay, there's autonomous, which largely runs off of known software. And then on the tails of that, Jim, you're going to see this on the tails of it, not immediately, but on the tails of that is going to be AI. AI will come in and make that even more safer, in my opinion. Not initially. Everyone's still struggling with how are you going to certify software, aircraft software that incorporates AI. So that's a separate discussion. So you mentioned AI earlier, and I'm just trying to tie that in. So going back to the picture, the question of is it as rosy? Okay, so number one, that's the first thing that people ask about the pilots. Uh, the existing battery efficiencies is a big detractor right now. So the existing battery efficiencies, we're all aware of that. There needs to be a bigger breakthrough in battery technology. Right now, there's just incremental. I get it, but right now it's the battery technology that's limiting the payload, how many passengers we can carry, and how far we can go.
Got it. Got it. Well, I think we covered a lot of things today. And there's a lot of things to digest where it is. What would you leave our listeners with today about the impacts, what the future could hold, and your suggestions? How about that?
Okay, so first of all, I know that because a lot of people know you and your products, like ProvenAir, for example, a lot of our audience are going to be people that are involved as distributors or repair stations in the aviation marketplace. I'm throwing it out to you right now. You guys need to get involved with these companies right now. And the biggest problem I see with people doing that is that their business development people within those companies are all sitting on their old models. Get off your butt, start picking up the phone, going to visit these companies and say, how can I help you? Those companies right now, they're going through their developments incrementally. They're just trying to get the aircraft certified. They haven't thought about repairs. They haven't thought about what happens when there's a EAOG
Oh,
at the airport. We were
yes,
joking about
yes,
that, right?
yes.
So if you have an AOG for an eVTOL aircraft, right? Jim and I were joking earlier. Well, that's a small E, capital AOG. How's that going to be handled, right? How are you going to get the spare parts for that? They haven't even thought about that. They're just trying to get their airplane certified, which I believe is going to happen in 2024. So you guys need to get involved now. Keep your eye on AI and autonomous operations. Right now, practically all the big players seem to be coming to market with piloted models. I would jump right into the autonomous aspects of that if I was an operator or an investor. And we're all waiting on battery breakthroughs. So let's keep our eyes on that and hopefully it'll come to market.
So suppliers to these parts, potentially aftermarket distributors. I better talk to my wife and maybe they get out of landing gear and
There
get
you go.
into. Yeah, that's right. And coming from a pilot themselves, autonomous sounds like the way to go. So you heard it from Roy. Wonderful conversation today, Roy. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. A wealth of knowledge across the board, quality regulations. It's going to be exciting to see how this plays out over the next few years. But thanks again
I
for
agree. I
joining.
agree. Thank you so much, Jim. I appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, everybody, and stay tuned for our next one.